So let's start with a cornerback that has been named option. I don't want to say landing spot in Pittsburgh, named an option for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Former Miami Dolphins corner Xavien Howard, longtime starter, all-pro cornerback, former Defensive Player of the Year candidate in 2020, a year that many could argue TJ Watt should have won, didn't win. Maybe Xavien Howard should have won it that year, because you look at his stats and it was pretty unbelievable what he was able to do on a football field. He's 30 years old, and you got to ask the question of whether or not that's a valuable option for the Pittsburgh Steelers and whether that's an option they'd consider. But you look around the league and who's still available and who they can go get in free agency, and maybe it does make the most sense to consider the former Dolphins All-Pro. Can play inside, could play outside. I sent a couple of texts to some Dolphins guys and got some reactions on whether or not Xavien Howard is still a name that teams should consider. When you heard the name Xavien Howard, what was your thoughts? And do you think he's an option for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
When I first heard the name Xavien Howard, my first initial reaction was I didn't even realize he was still in the league, to be completely honest. I didn't pay too much attention to the defensive backs of the Miami Dolphins. Whenever you watch the Dolphins, the thing you pay attention to the most is their offense and their wide receivers and Tua. So I looked at his stats, and obviously you mentioned that 2020 season's ridiculous, but that's not the Xavien Howard that you're getting. At the same time, what are your alternatives here? Like, is it a reunion with Patrick Peterson? I'd probably take Xavien Howard over a Patrick Peterson. And when it comes to in general, you look at the Steelers cornerback room right now, it's Dante Jackson, Joey Porter Jr., who's only a second-year player, and then a lot of projects. So they could use a veteran in that room, and a veteran that has had a history as a ball hawk, somebody that can read a quarterback's eyes. So I don't hate the idea of bringing in a Xavien Howard. I think they definitely need a veteran in that room. And if it's between Howard and Patrick Peterson, yeah, I would probably choose Howard in that situation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's multiple layers to this. I think there's the conversation to be had about, okay, how much faith do you give in a guy like Corey Trice, Beanie Bishop, Darius Rush? Are those your top options? Everybody likes to bring those up. Oh, we're not talking enough about Corey Trice. We're not talking about enough about this guy, that guy. I think the Steelers really like Corey Trice, and I think they would love to see Corey Trice work out to be something phenomenal in the NFL. Corey Trice has dealt with injuries for so long that you have no idea what your expectations are, and you cannot go into a season with a guy as injury prone and unproven as Corey Trice is and say he is our only option. You can't even say he's their best option. They can't look at it like that, and they don't plan to look at it like that. I have a hard time believing that the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to do all this work and then say Corey Trice is our top option to start on, I guess, the outside, because he doesn't play the inside, and then you'd have to bump Dante Jackson on the inside. That doesn't make a ton of sense if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. You don't want a guy in Dante Jackson to become a Cam Sutton. You'd rather just have a true starter on the outside, a true starter on the inside. Maybe you're thinking Beanie Bishop, but we talked about it the other day. I think Omar Khan's making a major smokescreen with their love for Beanie Bishop already, and maybe he turns into something great. But again, that's not the guy that you're going to go into the season and say he's going to help us win a Super Bowl as an undrafted rookie, and we're 100% in on that May 7th. That's just not something that you're being realistic about, and the Steelers aren't being realistic about it. Then you got guys like Darius Rush, which may have an opportunity, but I still don't think that the Steelers are looking at him as our guy, their guy. I view the Steelers as a team that knows that they have options, would like to have better options. I think Xavien Howard is an option, but then you have to look at the other options out there. And I think that's when things get really interesting. You could go after a guy like J.C. Jackson, but I don't think J.C. Jackson is the guy that everybody once thought he would be, and isn't probably a guaranteed starter in the NFL right now. Adoree Jackson's probably the same way. You get it, guys like Patrick Peterson, Stephon Gilmore, great, but at 33, pushing 34 years old, what are you really getting out of these guys? And then after that, it kind of falls off a cliff. I mean, you could re-sign Chandon Sullivan. You could look at guys like Trey Flowers or Eli Apple if you really want to. Quan Williams maybe, but even he's 33 years old. Cam Sutton's out there. I think he's the most realistic option for the Pittsburgh Steelers still, but I mean, there comes with a bunch of question marks there. Xavien Howard is a name that once you dissect it and look at all the pieces becomes very interesting for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's 30 years old. I get it, but he could play the inside. He's got great ball skills. The text that I got yesterday, doing a little bit of homework on who Xavien Howard is, I sent a text to a good buddy of mine who's covered the Dolphins for a long, long time and just said, hey, Xavien Howard's still good. What's he capable of doing? And his quote was still good to very good when healthy, but an issue the last 2 years. Great in man coverage, perfect for the Steelers. About the best ball skills of any cornerback in the NFL still. He has dealt with injuries the last 2 years, but man coverage is massive in Pittsburgh. If you could play man coverage, that's as big as it gets. That's what they were looking for. That was the Patrick Peterson issue, is this guy might be really good and have great ball skills, but he can't play man coverage. And that's a major issue in a defense that plays almost strictly man coverage, especially when you got a guy like Joey Porter Jr. that you're going to build a defense around. You're playing man-to-man football here. Xavien Howard could come in here and be a man-to-man guy, put him in the slot, put Dante Jackson in the slot. Who cares? Doesn't matter as long as you have those two guys. I mean, you lay it all out on there. Is he potentially the best option for the Steelers, even if he's not one that people are currently talking about?
I think the big thing that you mentioned there is Cam Sutton probably being the best option as far as football player in general. But what is this veteran coming in for? To be the starter at the beginning of the season while these projects work their way out and they figure out who is the best, whether that's Beanie Bishop's your best option or Corey Trice is your best option. At the beginning of the season, you're not going to know that. You need somebody to be able to be that guy from week one. That way you can figure everything else out as the season goes on. Cam Sutton might not be on the field week one. He might not be on the field week 1 through 6. And honestly, it also calls into question, do you want to bring in a guy that has those off the field issues as you've gone through and gotten rid of a lot of the guys that brought you some locker room issues already this offseason? So with all that in mind, it just points to, while yes, Cam Sutton might be the best physically, fit player to bring in on this secondary, Xavien Howard might be the best combination of all of it, with veteran presence, with leadership qualities, and with still being able to, if healthy, be at that top level.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think Cam Sutton fits everything that the Steelers are looking for. I think there's like a negative, oh, he had a bad year in Detroit and he's not the same guy. I mean, I think Cam Sutton's best abilities is playing the slot. And I think that if you could put him in the slot full time, he'd be a phenomenal starting cornerback in the NFL. And a guy that could last in that slot role for a long time in Pittsburgh. But again, the off-field issues, you're bringing a guy that it's strange because he has a reputation in Pittsburgh of being such a kind, nice human being. Like, the Steelers locker room loved Cam Sutton. The Steelers front office loved Cam Sutton. They loved everything about him, his leadership, his mentality, everything. It only takes one incident, and it's a bad incident. So you have to bring that into account. And the Steelers, they hold a reputation where they're not really looking for that. And I have a hard time believing that they're going to change their minds and say, yeah, we're going to bring in Cam Sutton and just go against the grain here. And if it was their only option, if they went into week 2, week 3, and I could still see it. Like, if it's week 4, week 5, Cam Sutton's about to come back from a suspension. He hasn't been signed anywhere, and the Steelers are really struggling at cornerback. I could see Cam Sutton being a guy that they look to then. But right now, where we stand today, I find it really hard to believe that they're going to bring in a guy like Cam Sutton and say, okay, look, we're confident that you're going to be suspended. You got some issues. We're not even going to test out other options. And you make a very good point about having to look at the other guys that are developing first and see, hey, what can you get from them after this season or maybe later in this season? And I think that Cam Sutton kind of takes away from that, because you have to shove those guys in there week 1. And then what if they work out? What if they work out? Then why did you sign Cam Sutton? For zero reason whatsoever. Howard is a dude that comes in here, 1-year deal, easy, comes in, maybe a 2-year deal just to spread the cap hit out and you see what happens in a year. He comes in here. He could play the slot. He could play outside, wherever you really need him to be. He's a proven starter in the NFL. He's going to give you turnovers. He's going to produce. If you could keep him off the field on a regular basis and limit his reps, that's great. I think that it works out really well for the Steelers. I don't know what a price tag for Xavien Howard is, but what do you think they're willing to pay? You think they're willing to pay a guy? I don't know. They were going to pay Patrick Peterson $7 million this season. Is Xavien Howard, a $7 million, maybe five. Let's go $5 million a year. And are you comfortable paying that?
I was going to say that's probably where they were going to land is $5 million a year. This is a guy that was an all-pro. Like you mentioned, this was a guy that was a defensive player of the year candidate. With that comes a lot of leadership. With that comes a lot of, intangibles in the game.
Yes.
And that's why they liked Patrick Peterson last year, is not only could he come in and play the game and was coming off a really good season with Minnesota, but he can think the game really well. And that's great for that young cornerback room to help bring them along and help get them mentally at the right place. So I would be 100% okay with a $5 million 1-year deal. And especially everything, you say it all offseason long, everything goes back to the root of NFL salary caps and NFL salaries. What is your quarterback deal? Right now it is nothing. So $5 million for 1 year of Xavien Howard, I 100% would sign up for that one.
And I think that leaves room for other moves. I think that leaves room to head into the season and see who's available. I think it leaves room for more restructures. You're not forcing your hand anywhere. I think once you rule the Brandon Ayuk and the Deebo Samuel and the Cortland Sutton trades out, and I don't know if I 100% do yet, but I think if we're thinking in a way where that's not happening right now, the Steelers could sign a guy for $5 million, $6 million and say, okay, come in. And we still have, after you sign all your rookies, $2-3 million left. Like, that's not bad before any restructures. And then if you're going to go make a trade, like for a guy that we're going to talk about next, you don't even have to make any moves. You're going to have to make moves so that you have some cap space to spend during training camp and during the regular season, just in case. But you somehow did all of this. And I mean all of it. Like, the Steelers literally went out, got a quarterback, got another quarterback, got an inside linebacker, possibly the best free agent inside linebacker there is, added a wide receiver. This is all hypothetically saying that they went out and they're going to add these pieces as well. Added a wide receiver, added a rookie wide receiver, went out, added a starting center and a starting right tackle, got a backup defensive lineman that they desperately needed, added another safety to replace their injured and poorly playing starting safety, and another starting cornerback, and then possibly Xavien Howard. And all they had to do was restructure Alex Highsmith's deal. That's wild. That's the con artist in full pedigree here. That's as crazy as it gets for a guy who, really came in here with a billion needs and said, yep, I'm just going to solve them all. And we're not even going to have to really stress about me solving them. That's how good Omar Khan is. I look at Xavien Howard as a deal that I don't know if he's on the Steelers' radar, but maybe he makes some sense. And I think the further we get to training camp is when we'll start talking about that more realistic. Rookie minicamp, our OTAs and minicamp are going to be the first time that we really get to, okay, who's in the starting slot? Sounds good. Now we could evaluate how desperate the Steelers' needs are, because I would imagine it's a guy like Darius Rush, and they're going to test out a couple of names, but you're going to get an easy identification that they are really not sold on a starting slot, much like, they've done in years past with, Elijah Riley and Trey Norwood. And, they always kind of, we have options. They're never really sold on those options. I think Xavien Howard is a name to start watching.